Hey, I'm Nick DiMatteo, and welcome to Music is Not a Genre's PODFAST. No hand gestures for PODFAST. It's fast. We got to keep it moving. And no physical comedy this week. It's been a busy week. I have been rehearsing for a lot of gigs with 3 completely different set lists. So we're just going to get right into the usual. Thank you, as always, for watching and listening. Listeners, go to youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre. You get a video for every episode of this podcast and PODFAST. And watchers, go to nickdimatteo.com/musicisnotagenre if you would rather just listen. And everyone, go to patreon.com/musicisnotagenre to support this show, my band Rec, and everything I do. A few things to mention in addition to that. One is I am offering songwriting coaching. You can go to nickdimatteo.com/song coaching and find out all the information there. I can help you get any song, literally any song, at any stage of development to completion. That is something I love doing with, and I've done with many songwriters prior, and would love to do it for you. And some new singles from my band Rec that are out right now. Eat Salvation and Eat Salvation LR Remix are streaming everywhere. Go to nickdimatteo.com/music and find them. Or just go to Spotify and, or Apple or whatever, and search for them. And also, I have one more single coming out prior to finally the debut of Rec's Kite to Camden, streaming everywhere. It's been on Bandcamp for a few months now, and now it's going to be out for the rest of the world. Let's get to the topic this week. PODFAST 27. It is Working in Harmony, songs made famous by women that were written by men. So the last PODFAST I did one about covers, second chance cover, songs that were a bigger hit as covers or whatever it was. And when I was going through that, I noticed how many of those songs were made famous, were big hits by women, but were written by men. And I had noticed that before. There were definitely times in history where I was like, oh, whoa, this is a song that is very, not just made famous by a woman, but associated with that performer, that woman, and women in general, the empowerment and kind of an anthem in many ways. Many of these songs are, and only to find out that they were written in part or wholly by men. And so that is why I am doing this. And, one of the things that I talked about years ago, I did a series, I think 3 or about 4 episodes, called Illusion in Music. You can find it on youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre. I think I made a playlist of the illusion in music. And my idea there was that things are never what they really seem, or they rarely are. So something that is considered singer-songwriter might have been written by somebody else, or something that is considered electro or rock, or doesn't have that kind of sound to it, might have been written by one singer-songwriter and just wants to produce it in a certain way. Or guitar solos that we think of, or any solos that we think of as amazing, so many of them were comped, and comped means do several takes and then pick the parts that you like. And, a lot of people, a lot of musicians that I work with, in fact, tend to think that in order for something to have integrity in the studio, let's say, it needs to be done on the whole the way you might do it live, or perfectly in one take, or whatever it is. And I completely disagree with that. The studio is a different animal than live. I prefer the studio in many ways, but this is all to say that what goes into a song is not necessarily what it looks like when it comes out. And yet it's all organic. And the other reason I'm doing this is because we are constantly focusing in this culture. And I mean, this is not just recent. It is not an internet thing. It is a humanity thing. We like division. We like scandal. We like fights. Or, if you like this genre or this band, you can't like this genre or this band. Was the music made, originally by white people or black people? And there are cases and there are instances in certain issues where it is important I think it's always important to know the history and to understand who gets the credit. But in terms of making it contentious, I have said over and over again, I do not agree with that. And this one in particular, this episode is about the age-old battle of the sexes, is what they used to call it. And while gender is fluid and gender characteristics are way more arbitrary than we realize, and always have been, and what we think of as a man today was not how men thought of themselves even in the 18th century. Let's say something like that. There is still a stark cultural division between women and men, no matter how much we try to equalize everything and say that, music is not a genre and people are not their gender, or don't have to be. And all the trappings that go with those stereotypes still come into play, especially for large swaths of the culture, certain, who believe certain things about men and women very strongly. So this episode is a bit of a corrective to that, as an illustration of how, just like people with different cultural backgrounds can work together far more peacefully in music and elsewhere in the world than the hype would have you believe, women and men have often worked together and been probably more often than not literally in harmony, which is where I get working in harmony, for the betterment of women and to the help of the men who worked with them for decades and longer than that. So I have a fairly extensive list of well-known songs made famous by women that were written by men. There's no history to speak of. I mean, maybe there is, but that's not something I'm going to go into. So what I'm going to do is give some qualifications, a little intro of qualifications, and then I'm just going to dive into the songs by decade, then some conclusions, and then some questions. That's it. It's a PODFAST, no fat. Sources here, Wikipedia. 961theriver.iheart.com had a great list of these songs. Listly had an article on 75 greatest women's anthems written by men, and you will find out later on why I disagreed with several of the choices on both of those lists. There was a Reddit discussion that dived into things that those lists missed, actually, and Discogs, which is a great source of information for a lot of things, music. Some disclaimers: I will not just miss songs, I will leave out some deliberately. But feel free to tell me if leaving them out was wrong or what I missed, what I should have included. I'm not going to go too far into the crooner and vocalist era, because most songs made famous by female singers back then were written by men. Not all, but most, because most of the songwriters getting work at the time were men. And most of the songwriters were men at the time. So that list would be way too long. And plus, not some of those, yes, were associated with this is a female-centric song, but a lot of them were just wonderful song standards that could be, sung by anybody. Also, this is not to prove, and it's very important, that behind every successful woman is a man. If you don't know that's false by now, then I can't help you. Go to my Yoko Ono episode and you tell me what you think of that. You've been commenting on that, and I love it. It's once again to stress how people can work together regardless of differences in perspective and background, etc. All right. So the intro, some qualifications. Some songs were written expressly for women, and some were just written, and then a woman did a version of it that was more famous or iconic or successful than the previous man's version. Or maybe the man didn't even record it initially and just gave it to a woman, what have you. But it wasn't gender specific. It wasn't initially written for a woman. But many of these were written for women, and meant to be about women or some struggle that women have. The songs I choose will have been wholly or mostly written by men. Now, here's why I'm saying this. Some will have had female collaborators, but they didn't contribute the bulk. And I say this because there are plenty of songs on lists online that are included on these lists that were either equal collaborations by a woman or a man, or the original idea for the song and many of the lyrics, if not all of them, was from a woman. I'm not going to include those, or most of them, because that doesn't apply here. The idea is it's a song wholly or mostly written by a man. That's the whole point of this PODFAST. But I am going to put on some of those songs, especially ones that showed up on other lists, if only to set the record straight that these shouldn't be on those lists. And I'm going to mention that. When I decide that, I'm going to give more weight to the lyrics. You know, I love the music for anything, but I got to say, example, if 5 guys contributed chords and melody and beats, you know, and other arrangement and production things to a song, but the woman wrote most or all of the lyrics, like, for example, Beyonce's Run the World, I'm not putting that on the list. And that was on some lists. So right off the bat, right there, that should not be on these lists because it was primarily, in my mind, written by a woman. Songwriting by committee like that can yield some amazing results. I'm not against it, but it 100% matters to me, and I think to this idea, who wrote the lyrics more than who wrote the music. So since the crooner vocalist era was still going strong through the 1950s, you know, rock and roll notwithstanding and all the rest of that, folk and everything, there are very few examples outside of that where a woman hit the charts hard with a song written by a man. And I couldn't find any, to be honest. There may have been songs in the 50s that were not crooner standards, whatever, that were written by a man, made famous by a woman. I couldn't find any. Please tell me what I missed. But that said, I'm going to start with the 1960s, and I'm going to do that right now. So 1961, Crazy by Patsy Cline, of course written by Willie Nelson in a fury of writing. In 1958, when he also wrote Funny How Time Slips Away and Nightlife, nobody wanted to record this song because it was too complex for country, jazzy, chords, whatever, that whole genre division thing. But eventually Patsy Cline's crew heard it, said this is good. She liked it too, recorded it, was a big hit. In 1963, the song You Don't Own Me by Leslie Gore, which she was 17 when she sang this song, when she recorded this song. It was actually written by Philadelphia songwriters John Madara and David White. Another one from 1965, 66. It was released in 65, became a hit in 66, is These Boots Are Made for Walking. Of course, Nancy Sinatra. Written by Lee Hazelwood, and he was going to record it himself. But Frank Sinatra said, no, don't do that. It's going to sound too harsh and abusive coming from a man. This is the perfect lyric for a woman. And he was right. Sure, he was also advocating for his daughter, but I think the greater point is here, whatever other issues you might have with Sinatra, is he was right about this. When Nancy Sinatra made it a hit, it was way more iconic being sung by her than it would have been by a man. And then, of course, rounding out the decade, and again, this is just a sampling, but these are the biggies. Respect, RESPECT, Aretha Franklin, 1967. You probably already know, partly because I believe I said it in the last PODFAST, that it was recorded and written by Otis Redding in 1965. But she took it to the next level and made it what it was meant to be, really always meant to be. And I think even he knew that. So 1970s, 1971, Me and Bobby McGee, Janis Joplin's posthumous #1 hit. It was written by the great Chris Christopherson and was first recorded by Roger Miller in 1969. So really not at all meant for a woman, but she just knocked it out of the park. And it was only the, at the time, second posthumously released #1. Otis Redding, again, speaking of Sitting on the Dock of the Bay, was also a posthumous #1. And only a handful of those have happened since. I Am Woman, Hear Me Roar is not how Helen Reddy sang it in 1972, but it was a huge hit. And it was co-written by Helen Reddy and Ray Burton, and this is the first of many songs that I'm going to mention that should not be on this list. There were lists online that included I Am Woman, but I looked into it, the idea of it, and most of the song written by Helen Reddy. I don't know how much Ray Burton contributed. In fact, there's been a dispute. Since its creation, Burton claimed he did more than Helen Reddy says, and that it had more to do with a bunch of women sitting around in a group whining about men. So fuck him, right? And my gut is telling me in this case that I give it to Helen Reddy more than Ray Burton, and so it shouldn't be on this list. Same year, 1972, Women's Love Rights. I I've never heard of this song, but it was intriguing enough for me to include it here. It was by the artist Laura Lee, but it was written by Angelo Bond and William Witherspoon. So it's women's love rights, women apostrophe S. So the rights of love that women have or should have, I believe is what it was meant. And she owned that song. It's interesting that was written by men, and you got to wonder what their actual motive was and purpose was for writing this. I mean, hopefully it was, they really wanted to state that women have a right to love the way men do, but, they could have been trying to do an end run around, the women-man relationship there. Who knows? You tell me. I'm a Woman, 1974, Maria Muldaur. This was a Lieber and Stoller song. They wrote plenty of songs that were sung by women. I actually could have put this in the 1960s because it also charted for Peggy Lee in 1963, but it charted higher for Muldaur in 74, charted at number 12, so she gets the win on this. But either way, song written by men, made famous by two women. Same year, 1974, You're No Good, Linda Ronstadt, huge hit. Huge hit. Was written Clint Ballard Jr. in 1963, and I did mention this in the Covers podcast because it was done several times in between before she made it a big hit. But again, written by a man, and she gave it the signature performance. Here You Come Again, Dolly Parton. Because the Night, Patti Smith. Both of these should not be on this list because the first was written, Here You Come Again, by the great songwriting team, Barry Mann and Cynthia Weil. So half of it was at least written by a woman. So again, doesn't count. And Patti Smith and Springsteen co-wrote Because the Night, Here's How It Happened. He recorded it, didn't love it, gave it to Patti Smith. She added her own lyrics, rewrote some of the words. So to me, that is a collaboration. And even though the original idea was Springsteen, I'm going to call this a gray area, but I'm going to lean in the direction of this should not be on the list. You tell me if I'm wrong. Skipping ahead to 1978, I Will Survive. Talk about an anthem. An anthem for anyone struggling, but in particular, it was a gay anthem. It's an LGBTQ anthem. Gloria Gaynor killed it. It was written by Freddie Perrin and Dino Fakaris. And then, same year, another anthem, I'm Every Woman, Chaka Khan. Wasn't the only time that it hit the charts, but it was the first time. I wasn't going to include this because it was co-written by the great Nick Ashford and Valerie Simpson. Ashford and Simpson were a great songwriting team and a great recording artist as well. But it turns out all of the lyrics of I'm Every Woman written by Nick Ashford. So let's hear it for Nick's. You can applaud. I'll pause for your applause. No More Tears, Enough is Enough, 1979. Enough is enough. I mean, that talk about a iconic disco song by Barbra Streisand and Donna Summer, but it was written by Paul Jabara and Bruce Roberts. And then same year, 1979, another, to me, iconic song by Philadelphia's own Sister Sledge. In 79, We Are Family was written by Bernard Edwards and Nile Rodgers of Chic fame, something that they would do often. In fact, starting in 1980 for Diana Ross, Bernard Edwards and Nile Rodgers wrote I'm Coming Out, Talk About an Anthem, and one of my favorite songs of the early part of the 1980s. And just in general, I have loved this song since it came out, ironically, or, pun intended. But again, those were the dudes from Chic. Nile Rodgers has had his hand in so many hits for so many artists. Same year, Woman in Love, 1980. Streisand, it was a big hit. Barry and Robin Gibb. Now, I believe that was the album that they wrote all the songs for or something like that. Of course, this is when in the United States they weren't that popular and they had shifted, the Gibb brothers, to writing for other people. And many of those other people were women. And here's the perfect example is the Barbra Streisand song, Woman in Love, and the album. Following year in 1981, of course, Mickey, Tony Basil. I mentioned this in the last PODFAST, so I'm not going to go too much into it except to say British group Racey, R-A-C-E-Y, wrote and recorded it in 1979 as Kitty. She changed the name, the gender, reinvigorated it, made it into what it was meant to be, which is the point of this entire PODFAST. That's what these women do, and it hit the chart huge. Same year, Joan Jett and the Blackhearts released I Love Rock and Roll. I think I've known for a pretty long time that this was a cover, but the Arrows did release it in 1975. The dudes who wrote it, Alan Merrill and Jake Hooker, but she turned it into the main thing. Nasty Girl following year, Vanity 6 in 1982. Big hit for Nasty Girl, of course. Pause for you to tell me who wrote this. Yes, it was Prince. And, of course, the band was more or less his creation as well, or at least he helped them, become famous at the time. Big note that Prince was one of the major contributors of songs for women for years and years and years. And the thing about that is so many of them were chart and critical hits. So you're going to hear his name pop up a lot more. Case in point, How Come You Don't Call Me Anymore? I'm asking you. That's the song by Stephanie Mills, 1983, again, written by Prince. Now, when I looked this up, it had it listed as an Alicia Keys song, which she was one of many people who covered it. It was on her 2001 album, but Stephanie Mills' version charted higher in 1983, so I put it here. Following year in 84, Girls Just Want to Have Fun. Again, I mentioned this in the last episode and in others. Cyndi Lauper did a Robert Hazard song from 1979, and it works way better sung by her than does by him, even though it is an intriguing version, listening to the original. Okay, same year, 1984, Madonna does Like a Virgin, was written by Tom Kelly and Billy Steinberg. Not written for a woman. I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, because I didn't put them in my notes, of course, Billy Steinberg wrote it because he was coming out of a relationship and he thought it was like starting over and that he would have to kind of re-establish his sense of being new and innocent. I don't know, something like that. But it was, I'm sure, a lot better that it was sung by Madonna than by a man. Also, Material Girl, released in 84 and was a big hit in 85, written by Peter Brown and Robert Rance. And again, way better sung by a woman. I Feel For You, an interesting one because it's another Prince song, same year, 84. Chaka Khan made it huge. Prince recorded it for his 1979 album, Prince, and I like that version, but no, the Chaka Khan's version is much better. It's just more fulfilled. Same year, again, same writer, Prince, 1984, Sheila E., The Glamorous Life. Same year, Sheena Easton, not Sheila E., so another two very similar names. Sugar Walls, Prince again, writing is Alexander Nevermind. Same year, 1984, Tina Turner, Private Dancer. It was actually written by Mark Knopfler from Dire Straits. Also, What's Love Got to Do with It, same year, killer song. Same album, written by Graham Lyle and Terry Britton. Control, Janet Jackson, 1986. Everything with her, especially in her early career, is a gray area because Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis more or less wrote most of, those early songs. Or at least Terry Lewis came up with the main idea and a lot of the lyrics. But Janet helped shape all of the songs as well. So I'm going to call that a gray area, but keep it included. 1986, Papa Don't Preach. Madonna, she definitely contributed, but it was mostly written by Brian Elliott. 1986 again, Prince again, Manic Monday by the Bangles. I think I heard his version later on. It's very, very cool and very different, but their version's amazing. Their version also of Hazy Shade of Winter in 1987 is amazing. It was way more successful than the Simon and Garfunkel song, A Hazy Shade of Winter. I mention this song so often in so many podcasts, I'm thinking of just renaming the entire podcast Hazy Shade of Music. And tell me if you think you like that or not. And The Pleasure Principle, in the same year, 1987, Janet Jackson, not Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, Monty Moyer, M-O-I-R, wrote most of this song about independence, womanhood, and assertiveness. The Pleasure Principle, written mostly by a man. In 1989, Madonna, Express Yourself. Shouldn't be on this list. This was a straight-up collaboration with Stephen Bray, and it was Madonna's lyrical idea, so no, shouldn't be on the list, but it is on some lists online. 1990s, Nothing Compares to You, of course, starts out. 1990, Prince, again, not for the last time, and Sinead O'Connor killed it. Free Your Mind in 1992 by En Vogue was actually written by Denzel Foster and Thomas McElroy, and it was inspired by Funkadelic's Free Your Mind and Your Ass Will Follow, which, by the way, I just rehearsed last night at a place called Funkadelic here in New York. It's a very famous rehearsal studio. One of the reasons I like it, also because I've been going there for years and years. Get It Up, 1993, another Prince song. It was written for the time and recorded by the time in 1981, but TLC's was a bigger hit. Creep, again TLC, following year in 94, was all written by Dallas Austin, which couldn't be a more Texas name. You know, that's like somebody from New Jersey being called Newark Camden or something. Ridiculous. But apparently a good guy and a good writer. And it's interesting that this was the third hit in the early 90s called Creep, preceded by the Radiohead song, the Stone Temple Pilots song. What an interesting time. Same year, Mary J. Blige, Be Happy. That shouldn't be on this list. Those lyrics were written by her and Arlene Del Val. Two women. Men did not contribute the bulk of that song. Just a Girl, 1995 by No Doubt. No, should also not be on this list because the lyrics were mostly or all by Gwen Stefani. 1995, Whitney Houston sang Exhale, Shoop, Shoop. Babyface wrote the whole thing. 1996, Mary J. Blige again, and Babyface again wrote the song Not Gonna Cry. Also 96, Big Mama Thang. You could hardly get more female empowerment from 90s hip-hop than Lil' Kim. But this song, it says, was written by James Lloyd, Jay-Z, Adrian Bartos, Sylvester James, and Harvey Fuqua. But my qualifier is, I think this is one of those collaborative songs where they did some of it, maybe the idea, the beats, chords, whatever, but she was rapping. So you got to figure that those were her lyrics. 1999, Oops, I Did It Again, Britney Spears, written by Max Martin and Rami Yacoub. In fact, Max Martin has co-written tons of hit songs, iconic songs for women. And you'll hear his name coming up soon. Man, I Feel Like a Woman, Shania Twain, 99. No, shouldn't be here. Lyrics were predominantly by Shania Twain. I'm sure there was significant contribution from Muttline because, you know, he was her husband then, and he's well-known songwriter, good songwriter. So it's much more of a straight-up collaboration, leaning towards her, though, so it shouldn't be here. Closing out the decade, No Scrubs, TLC, also shouldn't be there because most of the writers were women. Why put it on a list online if you're not going to do your research just to prove a point that a man was involved? So what? The 2000s. He Wasn't Man Enough. 2000. Tony Braxton. Was written by Rodney Darkchild Jerkins, Fred Jerkins III, LaShawn Daniels, and Harvey Mason Jr. Like legitimately written entirely by men. So was Since You've Been Gone, Kelly Clarkson. Again, Max Martin with the infamous Dr. Luke. It was meant actually for Pink and then Hilary Duff, but Hilary Duff couldn't hit the notes. She killed it, Kelly Clarkson, in 2004. Before He Cheats, Carrie Underwood in 2005, and it was a hit in 2006, actually written by Chris Tompkins and Josh Kerr. It's interesting that at this time in the 2000s, and I'll mention this again in the conclusions, country and pop were two of the last holdouts for men writing women-centric songs for women. Single Ladies put a ring on it. 2008, Terius the Dream Nash, Thaddeus Cuck Harrell, or Kook, I don't know, Christopher Tricky Stewart, and also Beyonce. The original idea was mostly by Nash, so I'm going to say this belongs on the list, as does 2007's Valerie. I've mentioned it before. Amy Winehouse made this Zooton song a hit, who wrote and recorded in 2006. There were 5 band members, and they're still they're still around, but at the time, one of them who's still in the band was a woman, Abby somebody, but it was primarily written by Dave McCabe, so this stays on the list. Now, coming towards the end of this PODFAST, you're going to notice something huge as we enter the 2010s and beyond, if there is a beyond. And yeah, I won't say anything more. 2011, Born This Way by Lady Gaga. Should not be here. She wrote it herself in 10 minutes, and I'm sure the guys contributed something, but not as much as she did. Fight Song from 2015 by Rachel Platten. This is my fight song. Shouldn't be here. There were her lyrics mostly, if not all. Following year, Formation, 2016, Beyonce. Shouldn't be here. It's her lyrics. Though it's a quick note that Beyonce's music this and other people's is a perfect example of how fruitful and amazing female and male collaborations can be, because she has collaborated with so many people and so many men. And although she has, run her show and written a lot of what she's done, she's worked well with a lot of people as well. But again, this shouldn't be here. Neither should Bodak Yellow in 2017 by Cardi B. Again, it's a bunch of guys who did the beats and all that stuff, but she did the lyrics. Sorry. 2019, Don't Start Now by Dua Lipa. Shouldn't be here. Co-written with 2 other women and then a dude. Gets some credit. No offense. Might be a fine person and did contribute. But a note that Dua Lipa writes or co-writes almost all of her own stuff, right? The Man in 2019, Taylor Swift, so should not be here. Anybody who puts Taylor Swift on a list like this, to me, is an asshole. Whatever you think of her music, like it or not, and I like some of it, she is a writer's writer. And why would you say that anything she's done was wholly written by a man unless it was a cover? Though, that said, I've often found it hard to know how much her many collaborators do contribute to what she does. And there's nothing wrong with that. But for somebody who espouses and is promoted as a songwriter, it would be more helpful and interesting to know how much of her songs she writes herself and crafts herself. Because, if she was just, I'm whoever and I write my songs, but I do this, that's no big deal. But she is touted as a great songwriter, and I'd love to know how much, she contributes through her own songs. I'm sure it's the bulk. I am sure it's the bulk. And then the 2020s, nothing. And I'll tell you why in the conclusions. So first conclusion, these songs would not be as well known or as memorable, and I'd even argue they wouldn't be as good as they are without these women doing justice to them and taking them to the next level. That is mainly why I did this PODFAST. You would think that knowing that songs that embody female empowerment were written by men would diminish their impact, but I say no. Because first of all, if the song is a great song and has that message, it will still resonate and has resonated and will continue to resonate. And also, I think, for me anyway, it makes their impact even stronger because it speaks to inclusiveness and understanding, aka harmony, that men and women can work together to create something so female-centric. You have noticed the more forward we went in time, it became less and less likely that a guy or guys would write the bulk of a song for a woman. Of course, it still happens and it always will, but it's much more likely in the last 20 years especially, and if not longer, that female artists are writing most or all of their own stuff. And I'm talking mainly the pop charts, because female artists have been writing their own stuff for decades, way beyond that. And it's partly why all of the selections from the 2010s were disqualified, and there are no selections in the 2020s. Although that forward trend of women writing more of their own stuff was interrupted by a surge of male-penned female hits in the 2000s. There were tons of women writing their own songs at the time, but in the pop charts, so many of those hits were written by men. That would be reversed quite a bit in the 2010s. Also interesting, and I hate to say this, but I got to say it, so many of the men who wrote iconic songs for women were known to be abusive misogynists. I'm not saying the bulk of them, but quite a few of them, Dr. Luke being one. And many of those songs included or were wholly about female empowerment. No, I don't want to get too much into the psychology of this, except to say that people and relationships are complex. And there is no excuse for their behavior. There never is. There never will be. But to understand it, you might find a deeper connection to understanding women and sympathizing them, trying to get to know women and abusing them than we are comfortable admitting. And I think it has to do with control. A man, who wants to control him and get what he wants from a woman will learn as much as he can about that woman or women in general, and then use that to entice her to come closer, the way, say, Ryan Adams did, or whatever, people like that who are very sympathetic to women but then abuse that. And I think that's where that comes from. But back to the main subject, it's important to say, finally, that there's no shame in singing songs other people have written, whether they are covers, which of course there's no shame in that, or if they were written for you by someone else. That's actually very cool. Not every musician needs to be a songwriter. Side note, though there's no featured song for this one, keeping it quick, I'd like to reiterate something that I've mentioned in many of my episodes, which is for the last decade or so, every single one of the songs I've written have been genderless. There's no been he or she or he or him or her or any of that. And while anyone can sing any song anywhere ever, whether or not you change the gender, I don't honestly care. In fact, I love it when people cover songs and don't change the gender. My songs in particular are designed to cross over because there is no specification. You don't need a specification when you're dealing with the deepness of relationships, let's just say, or your emotions, right? And yet these songs are still achingly personal. Just a note in lieu of a featured song. Questions for you: how many of these songs did you know were written by men? What other songs can you think of? Ones I missed or ones you disagree with me on, whatever it might be. And does this change your opinion or feelings about any of these songs? I want to know the answers to all these because, as always, my objectives here are music, conversation, and connection. Thank you for hanging for this PODFAST, and I will talk to you next week.